We'll be talking about functional classification this morning and some history about it, some recommendations on directions we think that the profession should move to find a synergy between the engineering side and the planning side, mainly the CNU practitioners and the DOTs, public works departments, traffic engineering shops that we have to deal with on a regular basis. So our first speaker is Laurence Aurbach, and LJ, I'm going to let you do your own introduction, and so we can proceed with the program. Thanks.
Well, good morning. I'm Laurence Aurbach, an editor and researcher specializing in urbanism and smart growth. So welcome to the session on the least interesting transportation policy. As you can imagine, I actually think it's very interesting when you start digging into the details of how it came to be and possibilities for its reform. The title of my talk is Functional Classification versus Livability. The idea is that functional classification is incompatible with the kind of urbanism advocated by new urbanists. The outline is in three parts: history, principles, and solutions. The standard diagram of functional classification says that different classes of roads have different amounts of through traffic. That seems reasonable. Even the most pedestrian-oriented cities have a hierarchy of streets, where large streets carry more through traffic and smaller streets are quieter. So what's the problem? Here's the diagram decoded. Mobility is the vertical axis and essentially means traffic speed. And that's what gets the most attention from engineers and reformers. But it's land access that has the real power to shape the form of the built environment. Taking it to its logical extreme, at the low end of access, this means that intersections on arterials are spaced far apart. So each neighborhood gets only a few access points. And at the other extreme, local roads serve zero through traffic, so they end in cul-de-sacs. This produces the dendritic network pattern that is the foundation of contemporary suburbs. Functional classification means as roadways get faster, they must become more segregated from their surroundings. So fast roads are also channels that every trip is funneled into. And to handle all that traffic volume, fast roads must become wider and wider. The negative impacts are well known. Functional classification has comprehensively shaped traffic patterns in urban and suburban areas. This chart shows that most of the traffic is funneled into a small proportion of the roads, which is the origin of the dangerous and congested suburban arterial. To get a better understanding of this, we can ask why and how it was created. So I'm saying this is the basic condition of streetscapes. A streetscape can have either low traffic volume and high livability, or high traffic volume and low livability. The past 150 years of traffic planning has been a tale of repeated and largely unsuccessful attempts to have both high volume and high livability in the same community. Over the years, the mantra for accomplishing this has been separation. Separation of fast traffic from slow traffic, and separation of through traffic from local traffic. There are two ways to separate traffic: vertical and horizontal. And these match up with two historical trends in planning. Vertical separation matches with hyper-urbanization, which is ever-growing density, taller skyscrapers, and transportation stacked in layers. Horizontal separation matches with decentralization, which is moving the population out of overcrowded cities out into the suburbs. Both of these movements were visions of reform, not the status quo of the traditional city. An early milestone was the first elevated roadway built specifically to reduce congestion. This was the Holborn Viaduct in London, which began construction in 1863 and provided a faster route over the congested Holborn Valley. The viaduct runs along the left edge.
Shut the lights off, I can't see you. And it's
Just talk to the lady over there and get them adjusted the way you want to.
Okay.
Thanks.
Having some filming adjustments. The viaduct runs along the left edge of this drawing, and the curving construction in the foreground is the access ramp from the valley to the upper level. The viaduct spanned 1/3 of a mile and cost £2.5 million. Construction was led by William Haywood, who was basically the chief engineer of the City of London for 50 years. Haywood pioneered a method of project analysis. He took traffic counts at the Holborn Valley, calculated the amount of time lost to traffic congestion, converted the time lost to an aggregate financial cost, and then used that cost to justify the investment in the viaduct. So if you're familiar with current transportation funding formulas you know this is very similar to the methods that most DOTs and MPOs use today. It's an antique, and many experts agree it should be replaced. Haywood was also one of the first to describe induced demand. In an 1870 report, he said the new viaduct would not reduce congestion at all. He said the availability of new road capacity would itself draw more new traffic. Of course, he was careful to report this only after the viaduct had been completed. His recommended solution was to build more wide arterials connected to the viaduct. And that also sounds familiar to our contemporary ears, the endless cycle of roadway expansion. By the turn of the century, new inventions caused a revolution in the popular concept of what cities could be. Images like this were literally a dime a dozen. This one was published in the New York Tribune in 1910 with an article claiming the multi-level street would increase vehicle speed and assure the safety of pedestrians. A drawing from Daniel Burnham's 1909 plan of Chicago of a shipping port on the Chicago River. A 2-level roadway along the waterfront would carry freight traffic on the lower level, and the upper boulevards would relieve congestion and provide aesthetic delight. Burnham's proposal was heavily promoted over the next 15 years. It appeared in the Wacker Manual of 1916, which was a textbook for the city's school children. Wacker Drive was finally completed in 1926. It was highly influential to the community of engineers who saw hyper-urbanism as the modern progressive solution to mass motorization. By 1930, several cities had serious proposals for regional, grade-separated urban freeway systems. In New York, Robert Moses adopted the Regional Plan Association proposals as his own, and America was off to the races, so to speak. Also at this time, a different trend started to become dominant, and that was decentralization coupled with the horizontal separation of traffic. The beginnings of this trend are a few decades back. An early milestone was Raymond Unwin, who legitimized the cul-de-sac in the United Kingdom. His team actually had to get an act passed in Parliament to legalize cul-de-sacs because they were viewed as dangerous and unhealthy. This was the Hampstead Garden Suburb Act of 1906. The act codified an early form of functional classification based on 2 classes, through streets and local streets. Unwin said the cul-de-sacs were desirable because they protected dwellings from the noise of motor cars. That's a modern Google view of one of the cul-de-sacs. 20 years later in the U.S., Clarence Stein led the design team for Radburn, New Jersey. Radburn was a greenfield suburb that represented the first complete package of elements we recognize as suburban sprawl: single-use zoning, superblocks, cul-de-sacs, and roadways specialized for traffic type. Stein and his team created the first functional classification system that addressed both mobility and access for all streets. Stein called the complete package the Radburn idea. The Garden City adapted for the motor age. The focus was on protecting children while also allowing high-speed car travel. Although only a portion of Radburn was built out, it had enormous influence on American suburbs. Through the 1930s and 40s, the Radburn idea was officially and successfully promoted by the federal government as the model for new development. The next evolution in traffic separation was developed by Ludwig Hilberseimer around 1933. He called it the settlement unit. It was intended to allow walking access to all daily needs and to green space. The separation of local and through traffic was absolute. This pattern represented the final and total abolition of urban streets, urban blocks, and urban fabric. Through the 1930s, hyper-urbanization and decentralization came together in high-profile visions like the RPA plan for New York and the World's Fair Futurama exhibit. By 1950, most states had some form of functional classification, mainly for highways and major arterials. Finally, in 1968, Congress decided that all roads should be functionally classified, not just highways, and that classifications should be standardized in all states. The functional class diagram was produced for the Federal Aid Highways Act of 1968. I said that hyperurbanization and decentralization were reform movements. What was the status of traditional city street networks during this period? At the beginning of the 1920s, urban streets were administered by engineers with backgrounds in streetcar planning and public utilities. I've got to say, I'm just taking lessons from Peter Norton here, so thanks to him. Their backgrounds were in streetcar planning and public utilities. Their common view was that streets were a public utility to be managed for the greatest public good. Their solution to mass motorization and street congestion was to regulate traffic. The consensus was that transit should have right-of-way priority because transit used the available space far more efficiently to transport people. Other suggestions went farther, like time of day limits on freight trucks, or even banning motor vehicles altogether from certain streets or zones. The motor interests, auto manufacturers, road builders, and their allies came to see this as unacceptable for their businesses. They pursued a different model, the unlimited expansion of road space to accommodate demand. With superior financial backing, organization, and political connections, the industry successfully converted the urban engineers, or replaced them with rural highway engineers who had no stake in existing city neighborhoods. This remained the dominant paradigm for 50 to 70 years and still guides the thinking of many state DOTs and MPOs which control the funding, planning, and design standards of roadways. If extreme separation tends to ruin cities and produce sprawl, what are the alternatives? To answer that, I'll take a more detailed look If extreme separation tends to ruin cities and produce sprawl, what are the alternatives? To answer that, I'll take a more detailed look at the assumptions behind this chart. It's possible to define livability quantitatively with metrics like safety, pollution, noise, and so on. Some people have developed livability indexes for streets, but that can get complicated. So I'll use a simpler rule of thumb, the presence of sidewalk cafes. Sidewalk cafes are an indicator. They are a canary in the coal mine for streetscape livability. What is the maximum speed and width of a road that can still support sidewalk cafes? Where's that boundary between livable and unlivable? Almost all sidewalk cafes are on slow streets with 0, 1, or 2 lanes. The upper limit seems to be 4-lane streets with two-way traffic and a speed limit around 30 miles an hour. And by the way, I'm referring to the actual speed and not necessarily the posted speed. This is West Venice Avenue in Venice with a very low 20-mile-an-hour speed and a generous landscape median, and as a result, it has extensive sidewalk cafes, almost like outdoor dining rooms. East Atlantic Avenue in Delray Beach with a 25-mile-an-hour limit with street trees and on-street parking, and it has a good amount of cafes. 3rd Street in St. Petersburg. This one breaks all the rules. It has 4 lanes one way and no on-street parking, but still has a busy sidewalk cafe, even a street musician. What's happening here is that it's benefiting from the pedestrian spillover from the cross street, Central Avenue. cafe seating does not continue along other sections of 3rd Street. So this is an exception that proves the rule. Washington Avenue in Miami Beach, 35 miles an hour with 15 miles an hour limit when school starts and ends. And it's really hitting the boundary of livability. The cafe seating on the left is huddling behind these masses of greenery that are trying to provide a buffer. And it's also helped by spillover from the pedestrian-oriented cross street, Espanola Street. So add that cafe threshold to the chart. The new urbanism prescription for livable streetscapes is to keep speeds low or moderate and keep the travelway to a reasonable maximum width. Since that limits the capacity of an individual street, new urbanism also recommends more closely spaced through streets and more frequent intersections, the fabric of well-connected small blocks. This is the basic new urbanist reform of functional classification. Mobility is comprehensively moderated and access is greatly increased. The curve for transit reflects the greater spatial efficiency of transit. Even though transit vehicles may be large and noisy, they move more people per vehicle. The same volume of travelers can be served by fewer vehicles, passing by less frequently, so the livability is greater. But at the high end of volume, the curve begins to resemble the automobile curve. Even transit can become unlivable when there's too much of it, as shown by this bus station in Guangzhou, China, the largest in the world. The pedestrian curve is labeled slightly differently than the others. At the low end, the important factor is capacity. Streets that can't accommodate pedestrians at all are not livable. So all of these charts are simplistic, right? Other factors are important to streetscape livability, in addition to volume. For instance, traffic speed and the number of lanes have a strong impact. Here's a table that represents those impacts. The livability is rated with a letter grade. A is best and F is worst, and with that boundary between livable and unlivable, somewhere between C and D. This table uses the traffic flows that are typical of functional classification. In other words, the big fast streets have high flow, and the small narrow streets have low flow. This explains why so many people prefer insular street layouts and disconnected cul-de-sacs, and why they fight tooth and nail against new construction, new street connections, or anything else that might increase traffic in front of their house. The profiles could be expanded with a wider range of traffic flows. In the low utilization table, the big fast streets get slightly more livable compared to the previous slide. But the real change is in the high utilization table. Those slow, narrow streets that were so livable, they become far more unpleasant and unlivable. So maybe in addition to target speed, new urbanists should be talking about target volume. Target volume for livability. Of course, as soon as you start talking about regulating traffic, you hear the same chorus of objections that we've heard since the 1920s. Our economic prosperity depends on ever-increasing roadways and VMT. Congestion imposes enormous and unacceptable costs. Regulation infringes on the rights of drivers. I correlated various transportation metrics with metro area GDP, that is, the economic productivity of cities. And basically there's no correlation, no statistical significance. There is a correlation between metro GDP and congestion, there on the bottom right, but it's positive. The higher the metro area GDP, the more congestion there is. That's because congestion is a byproduct of prosperity. The only level where you find a real correlation between vehicle miles and GDP is at the international. But at that level, the trend is all nations are growing their GDP over time. And as nations reach a GDP that's equal to where the U.S. has been, they're doing it with 3/4 or 2/3 or even half of the vehicle miles. My conclusion from the evidence is that driving is important to economic prosperity, but the amount in the U.S. is excessive and inefficient. So here are a couple of ideas for solutions. Reformers have been advocating limits on urban traffic since the 1910s and 20s, but there was never a quantitative theory to support it. Now a model has been developed by Eric Gonzalez, a professor of civil engineering at Rutgers. He melded traffic theory with economic theory to produce for the first time a theory that identifies the economically optimal allocation of road space and transit service. If you're a traffic planner or engineer, you're familiar with a diagram similar to this one. The x-axis is the number of vehicles, and the y-axis is the flow of vehicles. As the number of cars increases, the flow increases and reaches a peak. And then the road becomes overloaded, and the flow decreases and then grinds to a halt. Well, this relationship applies not only to individual roads, but to entire neighborhoods in urban downtowns. This has been verified with both real-world data and computer models. At the peak of the curve, when a neighborhood becomes congested with traffic, it becomes more efficient for everyone if the amount of traffic entering the neighborhood is controlled. In this simulation, the control was accomplished simply by shortening the green times of traffic lights that were located at the entry points to downtown. I'll quote from the study. First, the simulation suggests that judiciously restricting access to congested areas will improve mobility for everyone, even those who are restricted. And this is achieved with fewer vehicles on the road. Second, dedicating street space to sustainable modes, such as bicycles and buses, taking space away from automobiles, can improve accessibility for all modes, including automobiles. This strategy was implemented by Zurich, Switzerland in the 1990s, with the result that congestion there is less than in most comparable European cities. The flexibility of this model means you can alter the parameters and easily shift the method of limiting cars from waiting time to congestion tolls. If a community puts a high value on livability, then it becomes cost-effective to reduce traffic volume below the maximum capacity of the network. Traffic metering or pricing can be used not only to reduce congestion, but to improve livability. Many historic European city centers have strict limits on traffic to ensure livability. The largest is the limited traffic zone of Rome, which covers more than 1,000 acres in the city's core. They recently began installing these electronic gates to simplify enforcement. The city refers to livability as a goal, saying the zone was instituted to rebalance livability, the value of the urban fabric, and traffic. Imagine the Pantheon in Rome with no limits on vehicular traffic. The streets would be jammed with cars, and all those pedestrians and cafes would be impossible. The area would lose all of the qualities that make it attractive and profitable. So I think this new Gonzalez model is important because it provides a stronger argument and a quantitative model that traffic regulation can benefit everyone. Another option is time-flexible pedestrian zones. This shopping district in Hong Kong has a mix of streets that are full-time pedestrian, part-time pedestrian, and traffic calmed. The part-time streets are open to traffic during daytime hours and then pedestrian only during evening hours when people on foot fill the streets. Other hybrid strategies are now becoming possible thanks to new electronic technologies like time-flexible transit lanes or urban HOT lanes that carry a mix of transit and tolled traffic. The difficult administration of tolls, passes, schedules, and enforcement is becoming easier and cheaper. So in conclusion, what about that age-old complaint that limiting traffic and dedicating lanes to transit tramples on the rights of drivers and represents a war on cars? The goal of limiting traffic and dedicating lanes is not to infringe on rights. The goal is not punishment. The goal is livability for those cities and neighborhoods that choose it, to reclaim the power to determine the quality and character of our communities. The goal is a measure of control over the places where we live and work, and not passively allowing functional classification to bulldoze its doctrine of endless roadway expansion. I'll close with some words by H.G. Wells, the most successful forecaster of the 20th century, who said this in 1901. Now every new artery means a series of new whirlpools of traffic, and the wider the affluent arteries, the more terrible the battle of the traffic. There is, however, quite another direction in which the congestion may find relief, and that is in the, quote, regulation of the traffic. Thank you, and I look forward to more discussion of these topics.
We could probably take that taped version, put it right into an ITE article, and get it approved in a matter of a week. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good suggestion.
I think we should do it. This is a tablet, allows me to draw on the screen, helps get the ideas across that I don't remember before the slide presentation starts. We picked this title. Functional classification is a scary couplet of words. For the architects and urban designers that know how to put places together, terms like this just really don't help them at all. But the real world situation is that the development process goes in cycles, and the urban designers have the first cut, the engineers have the second cut, and then the builders actually of the streets and the buildings have the third cut. And the fourth player in the game is the entire banking and real estate industry that then sells what has been placed on the ground. So it's important to communicate between those four levels of activity, those four cycles of activity. But first, we've got some basic terms that we need to deal with. This is right out of a Federal Highway Administration document, so you can get it on the web on functional classification. And I want to emphasize the highlighted yellow words. They talk about streets and highways are grouped into these classes. But then, this is off the California Caltrans website. Then they say the California road system is displayed for functional classification to maintain the funding of these roads. Now, are we talking about highways or streets or roads here? The author that put this website paragraph together is using all of those terms interchangeably. And they're used interchangeably in the suburbs, where you've seen the subdivision named Town and Country Estates. Well, which is it? You see, it's when you put town and country together and name the place that, then both are compromised. You don't have quite the town that you could, and you don't have quite the country that you could, but you're in there in Middle Earth, and it's a very, very difficult situation. So we're kind of on a warpath to get these terms re-identified the way they were understood in 1928 in the Funk and Wagnall's dictionary that Andres talks about all the time. We used to know what these different words were. Here's another one from the Complete Streets website. Complete Streets policy ensures that a transportation plan is an entire roadway for all users. Well, is it a street or a road? Are you in the city or are you in the country? So this confusion about context is rampant. You can find many paragraphs in current documents and news articles that completely mix up highway, street, road, boulevard. We've just lost that sense. Our suggestion is when you're talking about the rural condition, it's roads and highways. When you're in the suburban, you can, well, we'll go on to the next one. Compact urban, let's keep the streets, the boulevards, avenues, drives, and alleys clearly in the compact urban realm. The suburban, we'll still work on that. I did some in-depth research on this, okay? So, and I've got subtitles for common transportation engineering language, so this is subtitled. All right, hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more. You know, you could all sing this song, right? Well, Jack is instructed to seek a rural arterial and travel a long distance, regardless of his motorized or non-motorized vehicular user capability. Okay, we're clearly telling Jack to go in the country and go a long distance to another city because it's a road. Now, the next one, if you've got a product that you've been working on for a year or two and it's ready to hit the street, then you've got a product that's ready to be sold in an urbanized area, clearly, along a major or minor arterial, etc. You don't say, hit the street, Jack, if you're upset with a person. And you don't say, this product is ready to hit the road. Well, I guess unless it's a musical band or something, we're ready to hit the road and go on a tour. But still, that takes you through the rural environment to another city entirely. So let's start using, and each one of you, when you hear things over the next couple of months, be sensitive to this and say, well, are they talking about the rural or the urban context? I think that'll help us. This is clearly the urban context, and that gets great walkability. This is the suburban context. There's a book by a Harvard professor called Outside Lies Magic, and that was brought to our attention 10 years ago or so by some good new urbanist folks. And this is what I saw out the airplane window as I was landing at Tampa International Airport. And you can clearly see the separation of the suburban dwellings and the office space here and the major highway and the entertainment complex. Now, I would hate to be Freddie, who lives in this house, that wanted to go to the movie. I mean, it's just impossible. If you're a kid, I guess you could kind of jump through and use the trail, the fitness trail in the office complex, and maybe take your life in your hands, go across here, get through the parking lot, and finally get around to the front door. So it's just obviously an obstacle course not intended for the faint at heart. Definitely unwalkable. Here's the street again. We're back in the urban setting. All four modes are represented there. Here's another kind of a nice lane. Here's a very tight street, and talk about an outdoor cafe. Look at this. There's some tables and seats right there. And so that's one of the tightest that I've ever seen, but it's in a very, it's great enclosure. This was taken in 1953, and I'm the one with the suspenders on. That's my mother and my brother. So I got a picture of this at an early age, and it set me thinking, it's just really critical. Just the whole time this is our house in France where we live. But here we have another invasion into the urban fabric where we've mixed up the highway and the boulevard and street paradigm. These drawings were done by Andrew Georgiadis, and this is the existing I-95 interchange just north of downtown Miami. And look at the paucity of commercial space and the weakness and just kind of the torn fabric of what you see from a quality urban sense. And his suggestion is let's do something more like Paris, and and then look at the real estate value increase that you could achieve under that setting, and you'd probably move almost the same number of people in vehicles through that setting. He even did a view down toward downtown Miami, and he also did this as his grand idea, and he's been pursuing this for quite a number of years, very actively in CNU. Complete Streets folks have done a wonderful job of getting the multimodalism, the all modes for all streets kind of idea. It's a fairly simple idea, and that's why it's on such a skyrocket trajectory to political success. They passed us considerably in a very, very short period of time in I think, influence regarding policy nationwide. And one of their surveys said 66% want more freedom. Now, If you attended Peter Norton's presentation several days ago, and in the book that he's written, freedom is what the motordom community used to force the automobile out ahead of the more efficient streetcars and bicycles and pedestrians. So freedom. If you want to get something changed, don't come in and have hundreds of slides about efficiency. Come in with something that's got emotion to it, either emotion or money. Okay? So I think New Urbanism really, I've seen in this Congress a considerable emphasis on the economy, obviously, since we're in the middle of the Great Recession. But that emphasis is really the positive way to go. Either get to somebody's emotion, like more sidewalk cafes, or you can make $1 million if you do it this way. No choice. And interesting that we are such a contrast from emerging countries in the field like China and India, where their automobile ownership is growing. In South America, the automobile ownership for the middle class is growing dramatically. And here we've kind of become saturated, and we're trying to get back to more freedom. So let's talk directly about the functional classification system under which we labor at the present time. You're probably all familiar with the arterial, collector, and local terms that are attached to the different facilities. Now, my wife's an English major, and she pointed out to me very early on that arterial is an adjective. It's not a noun. It describes a noun. It's an arterial highway or arterial sclerosis or arterial something. So it's not even a noun, but it's become a noun. We've thrown it around so much. Oh, yeah, go out and walk along the arterial. Arterial what? But the long trips, high-speed trips connecting major areas, no parking, keep them moving, philosophy of the arterial is built in as soon as you make these kind of definitions. These are all found in the very first chapter of the Ashto Green Book. We were so hoping that they would change it. They have a brand new 2011 edition, 2011 or 2012, what do they call it? Anyway, it's just published, and they came out with the same old diagrams that you've seen before. So, for years, I railed against these definitions that you see right here, saying let's change this and change the names of these, so we can get out of this automobile-oriented paradigm. And I realized that was impossible. They're so tied with federal funding, and they're so deeply ingrained in the engineering education system. It's a tribute to that education system that every engineer you talk to knows all about these three facility types. So I thought, well, it's maybe even more important that we do an end run on this whole process and talk about the areas. Okay? Let's talk about the areas in which these three facilities are applied. And by that, this is a current description in the Federal Highway Administration's website about what those area definitions are. Urban and rural areas, 2. Just 2. Now there's a smaller one that's called urban places. There are 5,000 and less, so they're really not significant in this ballgame. So we really have 2, rural and urban. And they say they're fundamentally different. Yes, we agree. And they're different by the types of land use. And they're different in their network density and their travel patterns. So they understand the ball game with respect to those 3 parameters, which are also very important to livability and urbanism. And then, of course, the way in which all 3 of those elements interrelate and defines the highway function. So they've gotten all this right. The problem is, once you constrict it down to just 2, there is such a dominance of the suburban pattern in the United States in urbanized areas that are defined by federal law and census, Once you have an urbanized area, you're entitled to an MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, that we're all familiar with. That gives them legitimacy, and the governor appoints who goes on the MPO. But the problem is there is so much suburbanism in that metropolitan area, that urbanized area is the census definition, that it all defaults down to a suburban pattern for the street geometry in the way of speed and lane width and curb radii and curve radii. All the parameters become suburban. So there are really two places. There's rural and suburban. Now, we plan to augment functional classification. We figure augment is kind of a, it's not an aggressive word, right? We're not going to redo, we're not going to kill functional class, we're just going to augment it. So we're trying to get gently into the bureaucracy and the politics of all this. And Dwayne Carver has developed these slides and showed them in his lecture the other day on the ITE CNU recommended practice, which is a great document in itself. But right now, the characteristics of arterials, collectors, and locals in the rural area are dramatically different, And the suburban, once you cross that boundary, the suburban pattern gets them to be more like each other, all right? They begin to look the same and perform the same. And our proposal is to bifurcate that urbanized area into suburban and compact urban. And when you get into compact urban, like you see around City Place, then those streets will, if we were 5 years from now and we were completely successful, the look and feel of those individual thoroughfare types of arterial, collector, and local would not look very much different from each other in the urban setting. You're all familiar with, what's the name of the street that goes right through City Place and opens onto the plaza? Rosemary. Yeah, we're calling Okeechobee Chokeechobee. It's so hard to get across. But for Rosemary, that would be a collector. That would be a compact urban collector. But in the suburban setting, that's just called a local street. You see? So that's one of the key differences in what we're proposing. And then once you get these differences, then it's also reflected in the network density that FHWA clearly realizes and talks about. And that's how you define the grid when you have spatially and functionally all the thoroughfares begin to be more like each other in the compact urban. So this is our end run, so to speak, on functional classification as a recommendation. Let's take a look at what that looks like in a hypothetical map. From the rural, you have an arterial that runs through, and out here on the arterial, you could be doing 60 miles an hour or more. This is a two-lane. And then it comes into the suburban setting, and you drop maybe to 45. As a speed, and when you get into compact urban, you're down to 25 miles per hour for the same arterial. And so this is an arterial that has three vitally different characteristics in its form, even though the function is still to take the longer trips versus the shorter trips. And then when you get an EPA grant from the Sustainability Office in Washington, D.C., and you can take your brownfield area and get it completely cleaned up, then you might have a new compact area that is not part of your old traditional central business district. And so once we get the MPO to designate areas this way, either suburban or compact urban, then right from the beginning on that long-range plan that goes 25 or 30 years out, you're able to say, oh, that's going to be a compact urban, so we're not going to do 6-lane arterials with design speeds of 60 in that compact urban area. Even if it's like a greenfield or a brownfield area of 800 acres, 1,000 acres, you do not put the arterial systems in. That's traditionally what's happened when you're moving from rural to suburban. You end up with the large arterials on wide spacing, so it's very, very difficult to come and retrofit to compact urban again. Retrofitting suburbia, wonderful phrase, I love it. One of the hardest things to do on the face of the earth. Once the ownership has been fractured on the land and the streets are in, you've got an uphill battle to get back the other way. So this is an attempt to redefine functional class in the lines of what they've already preached and what they understand in their documents, and we'll say, well, let's just take this one and let it divide into two, kind of an amoeba cell separation into places of two different characteristics. I've got a couple of quick examples. We're working in Cincinnati doing a complete street guideline for them, and there's the first chapter on why we're doing this and the second on the context. That's the key to what we're talking about today. The context of varied land use character and types and thoroughfares appropriate for each. So we're beginning to instill in every report we can do for a city or a county or a state these kind of concepts of proper context. And there's a massive effort to do a comprehensive plan for Cincinnati and form-based codes for Cincinnati. And they have defined these three area types of urban center, urban neighborhood, and traditional neighborhood. Those are their neighborhood or town types for Cincinnati. And then they use transect zones within each of those neighborhoods. So they may have a T3, 4, and 5 in one, or a T4, 5, and 6 combination in each of those neighborhoods. And this is a map of Cincinnati's walkable, compact areas. There's a quarter mile and a half mile in two shades there. So they begin to map this. And once you do that, then you can identify where the urban center is down here, and then the blue is the urban neighborhoods, and the traditional neighborhoods that have grown as small villages almost out in these outlying areas. So once you know the character there, then everything inside these areas can be determined to be the compact urban, and then the rest of this would be suburban. You see? So you can begin to administratively, through your complete streets document or your form-based code, whatever you're doing, your MPO plan eventually, to differentiate very importantly between compact urban and suburban. Now when you do that, the engineering that follows in the compact urban can have these excuse me, the new urban street design types that we know a lot about. This is our favorite, the 8, 10, 10, 8. 8 parking, 2 10-foot lanes, and 8 going the other way. We have speed guns that Dwayne and I carry around, and we measure traffic everywhere we go, and we know these work. So that's a key model. But look down here. That's a street that's appropriate for T4 and T5 transect zones within those walkable neighborhoods that are within the compact urban. So I hope you begin to see how this begins to mesh all the way down to the design level, from MPO long-range planning all the way down to thoroughfare design. There's an ST, a street, that's 58 feet of right-of-way, 36 feet of width, and this is a commercial street. One of the key differences is when you get down to the commercial area, you have tree wells, the old Parisian-style tree wells, because that gives pedestrians an easier walk on the entire sidewalk in the compact urban. And over here, you actually plant those trees in a planting strip of grass or other material. So there's such an amnesia about how to put urban streets together during this void of 1925 or 30 all the way up to 1980 when Seaside started. Seaside was the first to get back to the difference between urban and rural. More details, so we'll cover that. Now, El Paso, Texas, there is a distinct neighborhood identification along different lines of the street system and different transit lines that they have planned. So this area that you see right in here is all compact urban. So they're going to design the thoroughfares accordingly. This is a part of near the downtown. That's the Rio Grande River going by. And once you get this compact urban designation for the land, then we can come in and do individual thoroughfares and assign them to the existing streets and the proposed streets, and then put this into the zoning code. So for the first time, we've talked about land use and transportation forever. Let's get land use and transportation together. We've been talking about it, and finally it comes together legally. So if you own a parcel right here, you know that a certain type of street and a certain type of building setback and pattern and type will be required by the zoning ordinance. And that's really the best way to get your total package to work. Ranson, West Virginia. You see the rural indicated here as the light green, the suburban as the darker shade, and then the compact urban. We did this with placemakers in Ranson, West Virginia, and that's their compact urban designated on the comprehensive plan. And then that went right into the form-based code. There are the T-zones that are described within that comp plan and code. And then you can't see much of this, but there's a T3, 4, and 5. And Parkway Road can be used in T3. When you get to T4 and T5, it's all street and drive and avenue and commercial street. And these thoroughfare types are established, but they're tied right to the context. There are some places where people are trying to establish thoroughfare types independent of a mapped context place. And that may work, but in our sense, it's more important to do a thoroughfare characteristic that then gets placed on a transect zone, because those change more rapidly than the place types that are being used in some settings. And finally, in Ranson, they got a whopping grant from the sustainability program. They cleaned up some brownfields. They did the comp plan and form-based code that I just showed you, and then we're following up as a lead on an actual roadway design. That's the thoroughfare street design. And that's the entirety of it, 1.6 miles. And it follows an 1880 layout platting for this new community extension for Ranson, West Virginia. And it had this wonderful 100-foot right-of-way that just streaked right out there completely at 45 degrees to their standard street system. So they were influenced by nearby Washington, D.C. or some other great layout. So that 100-foot right-of-way just was kind of fallow for almost 100 years. And they just put a little 2-lane asphalt street on one side of it. And so our job is to revitalize that corridor. They did 3 different connectors to the north. They did a standard arterial, which is medium speed with medium walkability. And then they tried Route 9, which is a high-speed limited access facility to get north. And then finally we're coming in and doing the low-speed, high walkability facility to complement it. It really historically tracks the philosophy of some street designs that are available on the palette of what to do. And there are the transect zones guiding us. So we were sitting at a table with our sub-consultant civil engineers, and we were debating whether we should do angle parking and tree wells or just tree verge on the side. And we said, what's the T-zone designation? Is this T4 or T5? And we were able to look into the comp plan and the zoning ordinance that gave us guidance in how to do the final design on the thoroughfare. And that's approaching near perfect integration of those concepts. this is wonderful George Street at the end of our project. And you've seen it before. It's parallel parked on both sides, and this is the key. The speed limit's 25. The buildings give you enclosure. John Zanetta did some wonderful drawings and renderings for the project, and this is the new projected character for the corridor. These are the thoroughfare types. And see, you move into a more intense commercial area. That's the T5, all compact and urban. Then you get into the center, and you have a residential-oriented, and that's John Zanetta's drawing of the future, single lane in this direction, single lane in the other direction. Stormwater features in the median that are right up to date, no overhead utilities, and sidewalks, and it's a very highly walkable compact urban form. So it was able to guide. We won't do let me do this very quickly. One of the measures of compact urban, so you say, all right, we do compact urban versus suburban, how do we tell the difference? And I'll just go into one of the measures right now. This one, intersections per square mile, highly related to block size. But you can do this with any GIS system, any Google map. You can just pull it up, and we have Boca West here in Florida, 25 intersections per square mile. And that's because if you're heading to a cul-de-sac, your intersection doesn't count. That's kind of the rule that we were playing by. If you move to Miami Lakes, 141, getting much better, all the green dots. If you move to Key West, the pre-auto city in Florida's southern tip, you get up to 212. And as those of you who have been to Key West, you know it's highly walkable. Then Celebration, Disney's T&D, 366 intersections per square mile. Then you get into Seaside, which has 393 intersections per square mile. Now, Seaside is not a square mile, so you have to prorate this, do the math. You do a quarter mile and you count that and multiply it times 4. There's a question?
Would you explain again the red X's?
Okay. The intersections that we wanted to count for this research is intersections that would give you connectivity to the rest of the network. So it has to be you have to go through that intersection and be able to go a pretty good distance. And when you had a cul-de-sac tapering off, it just doesn't do that much for your connectivity. So if you have less than 100 intersections per square mile, you need to do some dramatic things to your town to begin to get to walkability. When you get into 140, 160, then you've got a chance. This is only one measure. There are 6 or 8 others that have to come in, but this is a pretty good indicator in general. So. With that, I'd like to take some questions, if we could, for both Laurence and myself. Yes?
Great stuff. I think we're really getting close. I just have one kind of comment that I'd like you to give your thoughts on. I think that we still fall prey to the idea that we're designing for cars and we're accommodating pedestrians, whereas I think we have an opportunity here to kind of shift away. We tend to fall into the same trap of saying that volume is equal to speed. That's not necessarily true, because the reason those higher speed thoroughfares have more volume is really only because they have more lanes, not necessarily because they travel faster. And we know that the nose of the curve that we've been talking about, at 25 miles per hour, there's a reason why I'm saying this, at 25 miles per hour, we can accommodate more people. You can accommodate them by bike, pedestrian, transit, and car. We just need to de-emphasize that the volume of people, how we're bringing those people there, it's not all by car. We're trying to get the transit to work. We have to have this network also clued in to the transit, because transit gets most efficient when the average speed for the transit gets about 17 miles per hour. You can look at all the different kinds of things.
Yeah, this is an entry into the engineering castle.
Yes.
This is getting in there and beginning to set a foundation for areas within which multimodal activity can really happen. And then after that, I think we've got to get into what I heard Norm Garrick say. In Zurich, they don't do so much with demand. They just say, this is the supply. You know, that we chase demand all the time with our MPO models. Yes. Yes, Scott.
Two great presentations, one for each of you. So in your intersection density counting, are you counting,
Just stand up and hold one of those.
are you counting alleys where they exist?
I don't think so.
So in the update of the website that we have, the affordability index, HDA index, we've calculated intersection density with alleys for the whole country.
Mm-hmm.
People can get that one.
Great.
The HDA
Great.
.org along with block size, which is really illuminating.
So you do count alleys?
Yes, we do.
Do we?
It's just because of observed behavior. The
Yeah.
areas are there, people are using them.
This may include alleys. This is Celebration. Does anybody know Celebration well enough to know if those are on alleys? So that's a great resource.
Yeah. So LJ, on your GDP non-correlations with traffic, I think we ought to start a little study group on what some better measures are. I mean, I'm not surprised you didn't get much of a correlation because, you know, when people die because of traffic crashes and we run up the medical bills, GDP goes up. So I think we need some better measures of economic well-being if we're going to, than simply property value and the like, if we're actually going to say what the value of what we're doing is. Otherwise, we're kind of stuck in a double negative, right? And I don't know if you thought about that at all, but I mean, we've got some stuff going on, I know about half a dozen research projects around the country of trying to come up with better measures. It seems to me you've got some of the raw data and measures now that can help better predict what the better measures are showing us.
That would be fantastic to see correlations with something like the HDI, Human Development Index, or Happiness Index, or any of these alternatives that people have been talking about.
Or even
And
net development products. We can start to net out the cost of congestion or the cost of health and so forth. And I think those numbers would come out a little bit more logically.
it'd be wonderful to see that, yeah.
Yes, in the back.
Just to bring it back to transit just a little bit more, just because it wasn't touched on very much here. As we know, there are often pretty direct conflicts between what an urbanist might ideally want in the way of a slow and intimate street and what transit needs to be able to operate a reasonably attractive and reliable product. We think that there seems to be a particular issue around bus services because bus services tend generally to be more neglected. And yet in a lot of cities, we're seeing that bus services are showing very clearly that they are not for the transit dependent, that they are achieving quite large sustainable transit outcomes. Do we really need some system here where when we have a crucial major bus corridor, there's some sort of transit overlay zone, overlay classification on it that emphasizes that certain criteria need to be met on this street as part of then how you authorize the street as well?
Yeah, good comments. And this process and this presentation was not intended to ignore any of the modal elements, walking, bicycling, or transit. But I believe that if we were able to implement the system this way, then we would begin to have compact urban arterials and collectors that could then be designed to be very transit specific. So when we have a brand new definition for a compact urban arterial, compact urban collector, we could have elements that we begin to design then within the compact urban area that would be very highly transit specified and get it down to the nearest 6 inches of what the bus needs. The primary thing we've seen is to enhance transit. You fertilize the field for great transit by doing great walkability. because every transit rider is just temporarily on a platform, and they're pedestrians before and after that. So walkability and transit success are highly interwoven. This is an attempt to get the walkability up. But yes, the specific designs do need to be addressed once we get into the castle. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just thinking of this from the perspective of a region like South Florida. I think that I like your compact urban areas because it kind of gets DOT off local government's backs as far as when they're trying to do urban development in their already existing urban communities. But really outside of West Palm, like Worth, downtown Fort Lauderdale, we're spread like peanut butter from Miami all the way to Jupiter. And we are an economic region, interdependent on each other for workers, goods, services. We can't take out I-95. I mean, it's not going to happen. So how do you see, I guess, a bigger vision of, some talk of taking the FEC lines, doing commuter rail, but we need the freight rail too, because of our regional functionality. How do you see all of that working together with this? I think this is a great tool for West Palm, like Worth, letting the cities develop as they were intended to develop and getting DOT out of the business of wrecking our cities.
Mhm.
But how do you see that? How do you see this playing into making a longer term shift, maybe for sprawled regions that developed 60s, 70s?
Okay. She was asking, how do we get the DOT sorted out in this, and how do we begin to heal some of the sprawling areas that have been developed over the last 60 years? I think the first thing is to get your areas that have 150 to 200 intersections per square mile clearly mapped as compact urban, if they have other characteristics also. To really identify that, and then begin to perform well in those. The eastward hoe movement in Broward County was, we developed all the way out to the Everglades Dike, and then we started looking backward, and so what do we do next? We go back to the seashore, and we start coming back out again with redevelopment. But I think this would give you a framework that would justify the kind of thoroughfares that you need to make it multimodal and walkable. And the idea that I had in thinking about it just for a very short period of time is that you would be so economically successful in these compact urban areas that the suburban areas would be clamoring to be redesignated into compact urban. And then you'd have, pardon?
Talking about incrementally
Yeah.
designating and then hoping that you have a hot area and then it spreads.
Right. They would be clamoring to become, and there's no reason why you couldn't have an isolated community like some of those in Cincinnati that were separated with suburban in between. That would be a highly walkable, compact urban area out there. It doesn't have to be a contiguous mass of although it's better, but it doesn't have to be. And then, as I said, if you had some brownfield reclamation or some clearing of older areas that wanted to be this, or even greenfield, you take out some agriculture, it could become compact urban as a replacement. Yes, Gary?
Rick, also answer that question. I, like Rick, used to work for a Department of Transportation, and I would say, direct answer to your question would be, if you want DOT to stop doing this, then you might start a conversation with them. Start it with the approach that Rick is showing here. I think most DOTs, at least most people in DOTs, will be more likely to talk to you if they get out of their bunker and understand that us new urbanists aren't trying to turn every street in the country into a 25-mile-an-hour main street. It's just the nature of the beast. They retreated into this bunker. So if you start with this and you go start having a conversation, I think we'd be surprised as to how many different folks in DOTs would be willing to listen to this. I'm not going to tell you that DOTs aren't still doing stupid stuff. But right here in Florida, for instance, I don't know if Bill Callaway's in the room, but was that? He was here. He was here. He's head of a district over in Orlando, and he's actually trying to do this kind of stuff. So at least start with your DOT and MPO. Start with the kind of template and approach that Rick has shared there, and see where you get.
I understand I work for a county who do stupid stuff all the time. Bureaucracy.
What happens is that DOTs tend to be very reactive reactive, they work from a bunker, and they will, if we approach them project by project, then they're going to tend to be more conservative. But this kind of approach, I've seen, Pennsylvania and New Jersey, Utah, certain places in Florida, they're sympathetic to it. So brick stuff, I think, is a big key.
We can take one more question. Yes.
Well, this isn't really a question. Going back to the intersection density measure, I know everyone likes that metric, and I used to, but I wrote a paper for CNU last year, and I've got a paper under review for Journal of the American Planning Association on intersection density and street connectivity index and connectivity index. All those ratio-based metrics do not work. They're simple mathematics. Their ratios do not proceed linearly with the study area that you're applying them on. So, for example, if you measure intersection density for, let's just say, a 6-block area in Chicago, you'll get one reading. And then if you measure it for a 10-block area in Chicago, the exact same street network, you get a completely different reading. And if you apply this on all the metrics and at all different scales of the city, you'll see that all of these ratio-based metrics are completely inconsistent when it comes to land area. So the metric that I would fight for would be block size, because it's the fundamental unit of urbanism that is not based on study area.
Yes, I think you're right that the number of intersections per square mile cannot be the only measure. And I think I mentioned that a couple of times this morning, that this just gets you in the ballpark, and then there are 6 or 8 other things you must look at before you start to convince your city council that you've got great walkability. But I would see the same difficulty with block size that we would have with intersections per square mile. You can measure a very compact area and get one reading, and then you measure a 15 square mile area, you get a different reading. But how do you do the block size for that same first area and then for the 15 square mile area? Your block size average would give you the same kind of differential reading that you're getting with the intersection per square mile. I like block size, but what we're after here is just something that anybody could do on their cell phone and do it very quickly as kind of a general measure. So it's kind of an entry point into the game idea. We know that if you only have 36 intersections per square mile, you don't have a prayer, right? So I'm interested in delving into those measures more deeply. But let's get the big theory straightened out. We've applied this now in 3 or 4 cities. And cities and counties can do this on their own. You don't have to wait for the Federal Highway Administration to bifurcate their urbanized area into 2 areas. So you can do this on your own. Yes, Bob?
You said you love 36-foot streets, 8, 8, 12, 12.
Right. 8, 10, 10, 8, right.
They seem way too wide for me, but you're saying you're not seeing speeding on them?
If they have at least half of the dozen things you need for speed management, like parallel, well, you've got the cars, but trees, building enclosure, variety of land uses, some of those things.
What's on 34?
Nothing really. I like 30-foot wide streets too. Well, it's. Do I hear any lower than 28? Dwayne, you got a response?
I was just going to say, we usually recommend the 36-foot wide streets for a T5 area, and a lot of that, you're right, in terms of speed management, you get better performance for the narrower street. What we found when we do our auto turn analysis is a lot of times for the design vehicle and the control vehicle that we're using in that context, in that T5 context. If it's a town center, occasionally you're going to have the 18-wheeler hauling beer through, and he's got to be able to get through. Occasionally, and every day you're going to have the UPS truck coming through. So those kind of vehicles have got to be able to get through in those contexts. And when we get outside the T5, we're looking at T4, for instance, we do go down to much narrower streets, 9-foot lanes, 28-foot streets. So that's why we like the 8-10-10 lanes, it's a good compromise. Folks will tell you, you must have a 12-foot lane if you're going to have, a big truck come through here. And the fact that we know we narrow the streets for speed.
I just thought about it, but we could designate the 8-10-10-8 as a compact urban arterial or compact urban collector. And what you were saying about what you like, those are compact urban locals, Bob, the tighter ones. But you see, we can get our own space to play, our own dance floor, and then be very inventive inside that area. I mean, you're all familiar with the MUTCD, Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. If this gets adopted, then you can take that document of MUTCD and do 2 chapters. You can do the suburban and the compact urban. And Larry, what's the first thing that would disappear in the compact urban?
Big green signs.
Big green signs, all right, on 80-foot stanchions, and all the sizes would shrink because you're going by at 25. You don't need to have this huge sign unless you've got some people that are visually impaired. So, one last question, ma'am?
I just had one last comment. I work for a transportation company, and buses can be daily on those routes, so they could be a design vehicle. And I know that our bus operators really don't like to go with because they've got mirrors and things that they have to watch out for pedestrians and things. And they really don't like to go. They can do 10, but they prefer something good.
Yeah. The mirrors are a problem. The largest buses are 102 inches wide, 8.5 feet. So they can generally make it in a 10-footer. What you need to do is have the mirrors just hang over the parked cars. You see, just drive down. No, it's really a matter of being very careful about your design, and like I said, every 6 inches is very important. And we've had some discussions with transit providers that want 11, and we've tried to argue for 10, and so it just has to be crafted like that. David Coffey, sitting in the back, can ride his bicycle from his house to his office in Hale Plantation Village in Florida, near Gainesville, because he has these kind of streets that were built. How many years ago, Dave? 15 years ago. These streets are so old that the pavement's beginning to crack a little bit from the oak trees growing laterally. But he's got it made, and he's lucky enough to live in a place like that. Well, thank you very much for staying. We'll stay up here for a while.